So let's start working on the contact list. So first of all, we will get the current user, as we are going to retrieve the contacts for this user who is currently online, that is who is logged in actually. You can say user dot current user. So we get the current Firebase user and we assign it to this current Firebase user variable, which is of type user. Then we will check if the current Firebase user is not equals to null, that is that user must be logged in. Let's create a variable and we can give it name as current user ID. So what we can do is, with the help of our current Firebase user, we will get the UID of the Firebase user, or you can say the user who is currently logged in, and we will assign it to the current user ID string type variable, and we will call this method inside the init state. Now the next thing is to retrieve the contact list from the database, that is the users who are currently registered. So for that purpose, we are going to implement a method which will return a list of type model. Make sure to import the user model, which is user model dot. Let's create a reference to the users collection in the database. So we can say users reference Firebase Firestore dot instance dot collection. The collection is by the name users in the Firestore database. You already know that. Query snapshot, and we can say, let's give it name as all users record from database, of course. Okay, and we are going to get, using our user ref, we are going to get all the users record from the database, and that records, once we get it successfully, it will be assigned to this all user record. Now these records which we get inside, which you assign to this all user record, you know that the type of this is query snapshot. So we need it in proper normal format, like we have to add it to a list. Only then we will be able to return. Okay, as you know, this method will return a list of type user model. So we are going to run a for each loop on this all user record, and one by one we will get each user information from it, and we will add it to our list, and that list will be a list of type user model. Let's give it name as all users list. So let's run a for each loop on our these record coming from the database. So we can simply say for document snapshot user record in all user record, as you know, which is coming from the database .docs. So from the user record, each information we have to get. For example, the UID first we will get, we will assign it to a variable UID. Similarly, the other information, the name, email, password, and of course the image. Make sure to use the same key names by which we have saved the information in the database. For example, for the UID, this is the key name, password, name, image, email. Okay, if you give wrong names, then you will get error. Okay, because these key names exist in the database for this specific information. So once you get that for each record, we have to assign it to our user model. User model, the first thing is the UID. So UID, then we have name, then we have email, then we have password, and then of course the last one is the image. So the image will go and assign to the image. Okay, and then after the for each loop, we will return our all user list. Now let me explain what code we have right here. As you know that I already told you guys, we get all the user records and it is inside this. Okay, then we create an empty list which is of type list user model. So we run a for each loop on our all user record, as you know, which contain the all user data from the database. So one by one, the for each loop will start executing. For example, let's say we have 3 users available in the database. For example, we have 3 users available in the database. Then this for each loop will run only 3 times. For the first iteration, when the for each loop start running, it will pick the first user record from that records which we get from the database. So it pick the first record from here, and from the user picked record we get the user ID, the name, email, password, image, and we assign it to these variable, and then we add that data, that is it comes in a form of user model, that is we assign it to this user model. That is, using this user model we can access the first user record. Similarly, the for each loop execute for the second time and it pick the second user record from the records which is coming from the database. So the second user record is picked from here, and then the second user UID, second user name, second user email, the second user password and image, and we assign it to these variables, and then with the help of our user model class we assign it to this user model instance. That is, using this user model we can access that data. Similarly, the for each loop execute for the third time as according to the example which I am explaining. Okay, so the for each loop will execute for the third time in the case, let's say if we have 3 records. So for the third iteration it will pick the third user record from this, okay, which is coming from the database, and the third user UID, name, email, password and image we pick, we assign it to the required variables, and then we assign it with the help of user model class to our user model instance. That is, using this we can access it. So as for example, according to the current example which I am explaining, we have 3 records, so the for each loop execute only 3 times, and then it will come out from the body of this for each loop. And as you know that we have to make sure to add each record to our list first. Okay, for example, when the for each loop execute for the first time, we get the first user record. That is, using this user model we can access that record. So that first record we have to make sure to add to our list. So we can say dot add user model. In simple words, we can give it a proper name which will be user data. So let me tell you again. When the for each loop execute for the first time, the first user data we get and we add it to our list. Then the for each loop execute for the second time, it it get or pick the second record from this, and then the second user record we add to our this list. Then for the third time, the for each loop execute, we pick the third record from the database, and then that third user record or third user data we assign to this user data, and then the third user data we add to our this list. According to the current example, the for each loop will execute only 3 times, and then as you know, our list is already populated with 3 records. So at the end, outside the body of for each loop, we return our all user list. So this method will return that list which contain the user records. Now, for example, the records or the users which exist in the database, let's say if there are 10 users records in the database, then we will have 10 records. In that case, the for each loop will execute 10 times, and 10 user information or data will be added to this list, okay, and so on, depend upon the condition. If we have, let's say, 1000, let's say 2000 users in the database, then the for each loop will execute 2000 times, okay, and this list will be populated with 2000 user data. And yeah, now one thing is it will get the current user information as well. So we do not want the current user, that is the user own data in the contact list. We want the other user data, okay, not the current user data. That is, the user cannot see his own profile in the contact list. The user cannot see his or her own profile in the contact list. So for that purpose, what we can do is, inside the for each loop, we will add a condition first. First we will get this and we will make sure if the UID, if this UID which is coming from the database, if that become equals to the current user ID, which is we already get, okay, if you remember, which is this one, okay. So we can say if that UID which is coming from the database, if that become equals to the current user ID, then in that case we have to continue, which simply means skip this one. If it is the user own profile, then skip this one. We do not want to get this information for the current user, that is the user his own information or her own information. We do not want to add that data to the list. We will skip that one, okay. So that's why we add this condition here. So anyways, now we have the user information. Now we can display it on the user interface.